What is human trafficking, really?
It's modern day slavery. They don't have to beat every girl. They just have to beat one girl in front of the others so they see what the consequences are. Pimp held a gun to her head, threatened her, and she's fine, do it, and
How many pimps, how many people are there doing this across the US?
oh, there's tens of thousands easily.
Jeffrey Epstein.
You know what happens if you leave? A girl can't make eye contact with another man.
Is there a lot of vigilante justice out there from fathers and mothers who are seeing this and just devastated?
And he had his gun pointed through his window at that pimp.
How do these pimps or others get knowledge of how to do this?
They have apprentices and interns. She would bring Johns into the apartment and have sex with them while these guys were selling drugs to the drug addicts. You know what happens if you leave? After all I've done for you, you're going to leave me?
A short while ago, I interviewed Brian Grohoski, a former FBI agent with over 20 years of experience working across some of the most confronting areas of crime. Human trafficking was one of those areas. We touched on it briefly in that conversation, but both Brian and I agreed something very quickly. This is not a topic you brush past. This is something people need to understand properly. Now, let's be clear. As a father of two, I resonate with something Brian said in the last episode.
It haunts me.
And it should. But if there's even the smallest chance that this conversation helps someone recognize the signs, prevents them from happening, or helps someone who is already caught in it find a way out, then sitting in discomfort is absolutely worth it. Welcome back, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, although it's an interesting topic of conversation we're going to hit today.
Yeah, like you said, it hits on some disturbing stuff, and hopefully we can bring some light to things to look out for and make people aware of it.
Let's start at the top. We may have covered this in the last episode, but I'm keen to start afresh for anyone who's just joining in. So let's start simple. What is human trafficking, really?
So human trafficking, very simply, is exploitation. It's modern day slavery. Okay, so if you look at trafficking, the word itself is a little confusing. So when you think of drug trafficking, it's the word trafficking, but that's the commerce surrounding the transportation and sale of illegal drugs for profit. But it's not the same thing when it's human trafficking. Human trafficking isn't about moving people; it's about exploiting them under control. Basically, keeping control of someone with the sole purpose of sex or labor or any other thing you can do to them or with them to make money.
Right. So it's like a modern day slavery in some regards.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you look at sex trafficking, the sex workers, they do all the work, and the pimps are the ones that get the money. So they're performing a service, doing work for someone else's benefit. So they're completely being exploited, and that is the crux of slavery.
So what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding that people have around human trafficking?
Well, there's a bunch of different misconceptions. I myself, when I first got into it, I'm like, why don't you just leave? And the more you investigate these cases and the more you talk with victims and you start to understand what's really going on there, it's the battle of control that keeps a person trafficked. They reach the point where the control over them it's self-sufficient. They've been usually isolated from family, from friends, from reality. They've been manipulated psychologically to believe that this is my life, and it's not that bad. They reach the point they love their pimps, the people trafficking them. In a lot of cases, they're grateful. When you look at labor trafficking, for example, a lot of folks come from foreign countries into the United States. Again, I'm speaking for the U.S. And they're promised these wonderful jobs, and when they get here, the jobs aren't so wonderful. They're working 16 hours a day, not 8. They're working 6 or 7 days a week without a break, and they're making pennies on the dollar of what they were promised. But where they came from, still worse. And so they don't view themselves as victims. They think, well, this really sucks, but at least I am making a little money and I get to send some home to my family. So it's the psychology that keeps someone trapped in a trafficking situation that is it's really strange. You would think a common person with common sense would just say, "No, I'm out of here. I'm leaving." But there's so much that goes into the process. And we'll talk about a little bit later that there's a 5-step process you can sort of break it down to about someone gets identified, they get recruited, they get brought in, then they get groomed, and then after a while it's, no, this is my life now. And it's that evolution of changing someone's belief system to the point where they think this is a pretty good deal for me. It's just crazy. So I think it's really misunderstood that most people think, well, they could leave at any time and they just choose not to, and that is simply not the case.
So you've briefly touched on it there. How does someone get pulled into this? I mean, you said targeted. So how do they get targeted? What are they looking for? And I guess we're specifically talking about the US, so we can stay focused on that.
Well, so let me take a step back and say, so the core federal sex trafficking statute here is Title 18, United States Code 1591, and there's 4 elements to it. The first is the government, in order to prove trafficking, sex trafficking in this case, the government needs to prove that the defendant recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, provided for, obtained, maintained, patronized is a new one, and or solicited a person. That person is element number 2. The third element to the crime is knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that force, fraud, or coercion would be used, or that the victim is a minor under the age of 18 years old here in the United States. And then the fourth piece of that is for the purpose of causing that person to engage in commercial sex acts. So those are the 4 elements. There's a broad set of things they can do. The recruitment, the enticement, the harboring, and so forth. A person using force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex. So that's the statute that we normally talk about. And then I think as we talk through, how does it happen? So I think for us, it would make sense to sort of talk about those first elements. The big ones for me are recruited, harbored, transported, or somehow obtained. So the recruitment piece is simply gaining access to a victim. A trafficker offers something concrete and immediate that's really non-threatening. So it doesn't look like, hey, I'm in danger here. And that could be something simple like a job opportunity. Hey, you can come here. We're gonna give you a job modeling. You're gonna be a dancer, a backup dancer. You're gonna be part of something where you get to travel. Your caregivers is another labor place where they bring foreigners from foreign countries to work, caregivers in nursing homes for, again, very, very low wages, very long hours. Construction and farming are the other 2 big ones that most people think about. So, it's by opportunity. Again, a trafficker can recruit someone by offering them that job. They can also offer them housing, offer them rides, money, food. They can offer them protection. If you work for me, I can protect you. That's kind of that mob mentality where, the mob says, we'll protect you, but you got to pay us. So that's one way that it happens, recruitment by opportunity. There can be recruitment by relationship. Sometimes it's a boyfriend or a friend or a peer. It could be a new acquaintance or someone you've known for years. It's just someone that has access to you. A lot of times you're brought into a relationship under false pretenses. And so this is where I sort of have the most experience in the human trafficking. So a lot of pimps will go out and meet girls, and that's the process. So they introduce themselves as this friendly guy. They're charming, they're charismatic, they can, literally talk the pants off of somebody. Um, but it's under a false pretense. They have an alternative objective in mind when they do that. Um, it can be someone's brought in by crisis. This is the vulnerability capture kind of a thing. Traffickers don't create crisis for people, they capitalize on it. So this is, when you're talking about runaways, people that are victims of recent abuse or molestation, they're trying to get away from a bad situation. This could be the addiction thing. You get a lot of trafficking victims that are hooked on drugs, and they'll do anything to score some more heroin, some more crack, whatever. I had a drug case in Phoenix where there were a couple of drug dealers, and in one of the bedrooms there was a prostitute, and she was selling herself so that she could get crack from the drug dealers, and she would have sex with them, have sex with, men. She would bring Johns into the apartment and have sex with them while these guys were selling drugs to the drug addicts. And it was all this sort of nebulous relationship. They just kind of worked with each other, and it's kind of sad and disturbing. Homelessness, family conflict, immigration instability, all of these things can sort of lead to a crisis that a trafficker can capitalize on and take advantage of that situation. So that's the recruitment piece. There's all these different situations that exist that can be manipulated. Harboring is another big one. This means providing a place to stay where a victim could be kept hidden, controlled, or made to be dependent. So, and the big key with this kind of a thing is someone's providing shelter, but that shelter comes with dependency and obligation. So, harboring somebody isn't locking them away in a cage. It means controlling where they sleep, who they're with, whether they have access to outside people, phones. To me, I see this as, and I'm not saying that all restaurants do this, but like Chinese restaurants might bring in slave labor from China, and they stuff them all in like one house with dozens and dozens of these restaurant workers working there. And then they bus them to the restaurant every morning so that they work, from 5 a.m. till closing time. And then they just bring them home. And then the next day it's the same thing. So harboring them sort of keeps them confined. It's a house, but they're controlling. They can't really go anywhere. They don't really have access to phones, and if they did, some of them might not even know where they're physically located at any given time because they're moved around so much. Which is the next piece of it. Rotating and relocating victims. A lot of times that's to avoid detection. It keeps them disoriented. It really breaks their ties to familiar surroundings. And this could be something like in prostitution, it's motel to motel or apartment to apartment. In agriculture, it could be from farm to farm. They finish harvesting a field and they load them all into a truck with no windows, and then they drive them somewhere else. And okay, now you're at the next farm. It's time to harvest some more. And they're disoriented. They don't know where they're at. They don't have phones, and so they're being harbored for the point of exploitation. So that's kind of the harboring piece. I'll just hit two more. The transportation.
Yeah.
Did you want to add something?
Okay. I did. But go on with your transportation, because my question's probably going to open a can of worms. So,
okay. Transportation is transported. It's look, pimps move girls around for the purpose of going on a date with a John, but that's not the transported that. I mean, it counts, but really, what transported means, it means causing or arranging any movement for the purpose of exploitation. So what you'll see is someone could be recruited online through a direct message, text message, Instagram, whatever, any chat room. And they'll say, look, I'm going to buy you a bus ticket. I'm going to send you the money, get on the bus and come here, wherever that may be. So a trafficker causing someone to move by giving them money, directing them to make travel arrangements, knowing that they're going to be exploited. That's the definition of transported under the law. It's causing somebody to move for the purpose of exploitation.
So we talk about the different kinds of ways that they can bring someone in. How do these pimps or others get knowledge of how to do this? Where do they learn? I mean, there's no school for human trafficking. I mean, like, where does someone suddenly become a pimp and then decide this is, this is the way you do it?
Yeah, it's word of mouth. You'll see the seasoned pimps that have been doing it a while. They have apprentices and interns. It might be they bring someone on board. You're going to be my driver. You're going to bring the girls to the dates, and they just learn the ropes by being in proximity to it. It's funny. There was this HBO special, 20, 25 years ago, Pimps Up, Hoes Down. And it was this documentary that HBO did surrounding human trafficking. And you can still find excerpts on it around. But there are 4 or 5 minute segments with various pimps, and they talk about all the rules of the game. And I had a trafficking victim that when she was taken and put into this life, he sat her down and they watched it and they paused. And he's like, that's the rule, and that's what this means, and this is what you're going to do. And the rules are crazy. Like, a girl can't make eye contact with another man, because, especially a pimp. Because the rules are, if the girl makes eye contact with the pimp, that means she's available, and that pimp can take her. And it's like, well, you made eye contact, that means you're available, you're mine now. And so you'll see, if you ever watch that documentary, all the girls are looking down at the floor, and one of the pimps is saying, look, they can tell you what kind of shoes a guy was wearing, but they're not going to be able to tell you what he looked like. And that was because of the rules.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's crazy. They talk about, the demographics of it, that it's predominantly, if you look at the statistics, it's predominantly in America, 60 to 70% African-American men that are pimps, but 10% of pimps are women. There's Hispanic and white pimps, Middle Eastern. And so there's demographics to it. And they talk about that a little bit in that documentary. But it was fascinating that HBO made this documentary, and these pimps were all gloating about how successful they are. And they all were blinged out. They all had all this jewelry and all this power and control. And they talked about that. They were proud of it. And when you follow up, they're all gone now. They've all been arrested. They're all in prison and for human trafficking and other things. But man, they were in their glory day when they made that thing. But there are all these rules. So to get back to your question, how do they learn the rules? It's by associating with people who know the rules already, and other pimps that are successful. If you show a willingness to have a moral flexibility that most people don't, and you're okay with that lifestyle, they'll groom you. They'll teach you how to recruit a girl, how to control a girl, all of it. It's
almost like training an animal.
It's a self-fulfilling, job that, and it's like anything illicit, it's that lure of easy money. So, they're partying, they're drinking, they get weed, they get drugs, they travel, they go, like you go to Vegas and you work the strip. And so, but you can go anywhere, and it's so easy online to post on the dark web and all these other chat rooms, and you can find it. It's so easy to do, sadly, that people just do it. And it's because it's easy money. They're not doing work. They're living this great life because they're not the ones servicing men, 5 to 15 men a day. is what these victims typically experience. So it's easy money for them, but the work that goes into it is getting the girls and boys. I'll always say girls because that's the majority, but getting your victims from that point of I would never do that to the point they're isolated and have accepted their fate. That's where all the work comes into play to get that control over somebody to the point they're compliant.
And that's the grooming process.
Yeah, that's the grooming process. Yeah. So it's when you got all those things we talked about before with the recruiting and all that, and then it's about the control. That's where the work comes in. It's someone who's being trafficked is being controlled, and controlled means limiting or eliminating their real choices. So the way they see it is they don't have any choices. These are their only choices. And that can be psychological control. It's most common and the most misunderstood. This is like loyalty conditioning. It's after all I've done for you, you're going to leave me. It's the fear of consequences. You know what happens if you leave. This is where the pimps they all claim to use finesse. Like they'll argue the girls are here by choice. I'm not making them stay. They stay because they want to. They love me. I'm that good to them. But in reality, they're all gorilla pimps. So there's finesse pimps and gorilla pimps. So they don't have to beat every girl. They just have to beat one girl in front of the others so they see what the consequences are. So that psychological barrier is, if a girl tries to leave, physically leaves, a pimp will drag her back into the hotel room and beat her unconscious in front of all the other girls. So they know what happens if they try to leave. And they're too afraid to leave because they don't want that, So it's that psychological control it's the shame of it. Look, you're damaged goods now, girl. No one's ever going to want you. You've been with 3,000 men. Nobody's going to want you. You're a slut. It's a shame of, what you're right. It's crazy. It could be economic control. This is effective and easy. It's you owe me. I paid for you for this or that, or in labor trafficking, we paid your transportation from Ecuador, and now you work for us. And until you pay back what you owe us, we own you. And okay, so now that person that came from Ecuador thinking they're getting a farming job is working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they're not making enough to ever really pay off their debt. So, there's these financial bonds that people will use to keep someone entrapped.
Wow.
Yeah, and it could be, again, social engineering, cutting off ties from family, controlling communications. Early on, when a pimp gets a girl, they don't have access to any phones. The pimps have all the phones, and if they have to set up a date, like a John wants to talk to the girl, he'll put the girl on the phone, but he's standing right there. And if she says anything wrong, the discipline's coming, So he can monitor what she says, what she tells him. And then as soon as that call's over, he's got the phone again. And it might take months or years before a girl has built up enough trust with the pimp that the pimp is willing to let her have a phone without him present. And it's all about isolation and control there,
So we've seen recently there was a bust in California, I believe it was. There was 600 arrested within a human trafficking ring. How many human traffickers, how many pimps, how many people are there doing this across the U.S.?
Oh, there's tens of thousands easily. Yeah, I'd have to look up the number to find out what it is, but it's tens of thousands easily. Yeah.
And that's just the pimps, or is that the
pimps,
victims as well?
There's more victims, many, many more victims. I really would have to try and pull up the current numbers to know what it is, but in any given hotel, there's probably 3 or 4 girls being trafficked. And it's fascinating. I have a friend that worked Phoenix PD. She's now retired, but she's a consultant, and she consults on civil lawsuits against motel chains by trafficking victims because the motel chains didn't do enough. I mean, they were aware, they saw signs, but they didn't do enough to stop it. So there's actually been a fair amount of success with civil suits against motel chains for allowing human trafficking to happen. Yeah.
It's always fascinating. There's a common perception by anyone saying that the police know who these people are. They know who the traffickers are. They know who the pimps are, and they just don't do anything about it. I think case in point would be Jeffrey Epstein, as to how long someone knew what he was doing for such a long period of time before he was actually anything happened due to his power. Is that true? Do they know all of the people that are doing it, but aren't able to actually arrest them, or don't have enough evidence? Or,
well, they're very intensive cases to make. You can't just see a pimp and go, "That's a pimp, I'm going to arrest him." You have to have enough witnesses and enough evidence to support the allegations. And most of the girls that are being trafficked are, well, they think they love their pimps. They're willing to go to jail for them. They're afraid of them. They're afraid of the retribution if the pimp ever finds them again out on the street. The girls are too ashamed to tell their stories. Again, some of them just don't see themselves as victims. And so it's really hard to build a case that would stand up in court. And so it's not a matter of you can't find them. It's a matter of the amount of resources it takes to build a case against a pimp or a couple of pimps. It's a lot of work. It really is. I had one victim that, she came forward. She rescued herself. She's phenomenal. What a great inspiration. And we had to rebuild her life to, she told us a story about she was trafficked for about a year and a half before she finally just blew up and said, "That's it, I'm out of here." And it was a dangerous situation. The pimp held a gun to her head, threatened her, and she said, "Fine, do it," and he didn't. He was a coward, thankfully. But to rebuild her life, the girls are hopped up on drugs to keep them in a fog, which helps with the compliance and all that. But she remembered, for example, he was mad at her one day and he kicked her in the ribs and she had a fractured rib to the point she had to go to the hospital. And she remembers being dropped off at the hospital in Phoenix, but she didn't remember which hospital and she didn't remember when it was. So we had to go to a couple hospitals with subpoenas and say, "Do you have any medical records for this person?" And sure enough, it was sometime in July, I think, of whatever year it was. And okay, so we've got this and we can show that she had medical procedures, a medical examination, and they confirmed that she had a cracked rib. And now she's saying it was because of this pimp. Okay, so that's one piece of evidence that took multiple subpoenas, servicing them on hospitals, waiting for the hospitals to pour through their records. One of the other things she remembered was that, the pimps always put things in other people's names. That way nothing can tie back to them. So she remembered they always used her phone number, and she remembered that phone number. And this was the early 2000s, they were still using the backs of magazines, ads in the magazines. And she remembered that, they were in Phoenix for a while, then they'd go to Vegas, then they'd go to Sacramento, then they'd go to San Diego. And she could never remember where she was at any time. So I had to go. Thankfully, they had an archived copy of every volume of that paper. And I had to go through every page looking for that one phone number. And it took me hours. But I found the 5 different weeks over the course of a year and a half that they were in Phoenix. So now I can put a pin, in a calendar. These were the times she was in Phoenix. And this time was a broken rib. And so it just takes a huge amount of work. to build a case.
Yeah.
So it's not that they're hard to find. You know, most police officers can spot them like that. I mean, so can I. You know, and but it's the resources it takes to build a case to get one of them off the street, and it's onerous. It's a lot of work.
Is there a lot of vigilante justice out there from fathers and mothers who are seeing this and just devastated?
I hope so. I know that's not legally appropriate. You know, that's sort of the premise of the show I've been working on. There are astute family members that are cognizant of there's something not right to the point that they even, know it, but they don't know who to turn to. The local police, the FBI, all of those task forces, they have limited resources, so they prioritize the worst, and if, someone complains that their daughter's being trafficked by this guy and someone else makes a complaint that their daughter's being trafficked, eventually there's enough complaints. That guy we need to do something, but are they taking the law into their own hands? I don't know. I would imagine it looks like just a confrontation on the street. You're coming with me. They find their daughter, if they're lucky enough, or son, and you're coming home. And the girls, no, I'm not. They're angry at their parents. They were runaways to begin with. And so, they're not really inclined to go home. And normally by that point, they've been brainwashed to believe their parents don't love them anymore, and they wouldn't because they're damaged goods and all that other psychological control that even if a parent could find where their daughter is, it'd be hard to break through for them to come home. Now, I will say that one girl I was talking about that was trafficked for a year and a half, we interviewed her parents as well. And the pimp brought her home one day. It was her birthday, and she wanted to go home and see her family. So he was generous, and he let her go home. But he told her, you keep your phone on you. When I say it's time to go, you got to go. And so he drops her off. He went in for a few minutes, and they didn't like the looks of him right off the bat. They said, this is, and they're like, what are you doing? She was branded. She had a tattoo on her neck from him. It was a branding. And she's like, no, you don't understand him. I love him. He's good to me. And no, he's not, And the family could see through it. The husband, they found out he was coming home, and the pimp's like, that's it, we got to go. Because he didn't want to face the dad. And the dad was this burly, strong hunter. He had his hunting rifles and firearms. It's Arizona. It's the Wild West. Everybody's got guns, So he told me when we interviewed him that he actually tracked down and found the vehicle with the pimp and a couple of his buddies. I was saying there's the internship. So it was the pimp with a couple of his subordinates. And he had his gun pointed through his window at that pimp. And then he realized at the last minute, my family needs me too much. I'm not going to jail, And so he's like,
wow.
That pimp has no idea how close he came to getting a bullet in the head. Because there are families that they're devastated by it, to think of your daughter or your son being victimized over and over again. It's crushing, soul crushing to imagine it,
It utterly scares me. Of anything like that happening. So I guess that's a key thing. So if someone's watching this and they've got a son or a daughter, what are they looking for? What's a warning sign that there's something's changed, that something's different, or that their child is starting to be groomed? How can they understand?
Yep. So it's interesting that the grooming for this, I was trying to put together some notes so I'd make sure I hit all the high points. This grooming is very much like any sexual predator grooming, right? There's grooming it's not about seduction; it's about behavioral conditioning. It's about, in the case of sex trafficking, how exploitation exploitation is made to feel normal or even deserved. Um, the grooming meets an unmet need first, and then over time, the rules sort of change about what those needs are. So, like you had a fight with your parents. I'll be your friend. I'll be your boyfriend. I can provide you money. I can do this. I can do that. So there's unmet needs. They could be emotional needs, like you're not loved or you were abused, and I love you and I won't abuse you, and so forth. So um, there's grooming. So some of the signs. First, fast intimacy. These are the things like, oh, you're different, and I've never felt like this before, and you're unique. You're so mature for your age, and you're this and you're that. Then it turns into secret keeping, right? Don't tell your mom; she wouldn't understand this. Don't tell your dad. Don't tell your sister. This is between us. And then it could be the love bombing and rescue fantasy. This is the I'll take care of you. They won't. I'm the only one who really sees you for who you are. So it's someone ingratiating themselves to the exclusion of the family. Now, if someone really loved you and cared for you, they'd want what's best for you, including a healthy family relationship. Someone who means to do you harm is trying to isolate you from your family and from your true loved ones. So it could spill into boundary testing. This is just take a photo of yourself. I won't share it with anybody. And then it turns into sexual talk, followed by meetups, and it's sneaking out of the house and all those other things that make your skin crawl and question what's really happening there. It can also sort of look like creating dependency. That's like, I'm going to start giving you money so that you get used to having that money. And once you start having that money, now you can't get by without that money. And so I'm grooming you very slowly to get comfortable with a certain aspect of your life that, if I right off the bat said, hey, I'm going to give you, 20 grand a month if you'll have sex with all my friends, nobody's going to do that. But if you need you deserve a purse. I'm going to buy you a purse. And then after a while, you've got nice clothes, you've got rides, you've got money. Well, those things, those aren't free. I had to get those for you, and you kind of owe me, So all of those things, the secret keeping, the fast intimacy and so forth, the isolation, perhaps an unexplained job or unexplained income, all of those things that just sound wrong are the obvious ones, and these are the same things that a sexual predator would do. It's try to talk in secret and don't tell your parents about us, and they wouldn't understand, and so on and so forth. So
if you're a friend, if you're a family member, if you spot this kind of thing happening, without obvious confrontation, which could put yourself at harm or also risk the loss of the victim because they side with the other person, what should you do? How do you approach this to be able to help them but not push them away?
So how do you protect your child, right? This is a great thing to talk about. Reduce the secrecy. And this is a big one. We did this with our own daughter. Like, look, you can call 24/7, no punishment, no questions asked. If you feel unsafe, call. We'll figure it out later, but always call. We will not judge. We will not punish. Your safety is number one thing. Parents should definitely talk about grooming, and you can do a lot of research online. I mean, there's a ton of things you can look at about grooming that are out there, but talk about grooming like you talk about drugs. That, look, everybody knows drugs are bad. Here's why, and here's why grooming's bad. You might like the attention. You might think someone cares for you, but it's like its own drug. It's a danger to you. You can get hooked on that grooming, that attention, that affection, that whatever it is. And so parents need to, really express to their kids that grooming is no different than drugs, and they should talk to them the same way. Certainly don't let, and this has to be age appropriate, privacy with electronic devices, like anything, know who your kids are talking to, know who's direct messaging them. I think it's great. I think every 3 minutes I see one of those Instagram ads for, protecting teen accounts, that people can't just text teens anymore on Instagram. So that's great, but get on your kids' devices and look for apps that have disappearing messages, things that, are designed around secrecy. Keep the devices out of the kids' rooms at night, especially with the younger kids. I know it's harder with the older ones. You might normalize a code word for pickup. That's one of the things we also taught our daughter is, hey, if you're in trouble, call and just say this particular phrase. We'll know you're in trouble. You don't have to say it out loud that, you don't feel safe with people around, because, there's a lot of peer pressure, but have a code word, and again, make sure the kids share their location. Make sure that location sharing is turned on, so you can always track your kid's phone and find them. I do that with my wife, so I know when she's on her way home from work.
My wife does that with me.
Yeah, there you go. And, there's always the other signs of lifestyle changes, gifts, older friends, new boyfriends or partners that are just a little too old, don't seem right. Maybe a new phone, an extra phone, unexplained cash, unexplained rides. You're getting picked up from people you don't know. That type of stuff. It's the stuff you would expect. I wish I had a magic bullet for that. But it really the protection comes from good parenting. Be involved with your kids and know what they're doing. And don't be afraid to ask them and talk to them. They're going to resent you for it. They're going to resent you anyway. You're the parents. So just, just tell them, like, we have to have this conversation. My wife has a really good technique for that. And then I learned it. A guy at work did the same thing. So you can say, look, I'm wearing 2 hats. I've got 2 hats. I'm your dad. You put on your dad hat, we have fun. But if it's something important, now I'm your father. I need to know about, are you safe medically? Do you have anything going on? This is the business guy. One of my friends at work, who was a supervisor in the FBI, he had his 2 hats. He's like, normally I'm Mike, and we're having a good time and we're working cases. But if there's something that comes up that's serious, I got to put on my supervisor hat. And just saying that word, hey, look, we're in a different hat right now. This isn't personal. And then you just start with the uncomfortable. And it's like any conversation with anybody. The first sentence is always the worst part of an uncomfortable conversation. Once you get that first sentence out of the way, it flows. And it's wonderful, because you get below the surface and you start to have meaningful connection.
Brian, this has been so insightful. For anyone watching, what we're going to do is we're going to put the key points up on the screen so you can see them, and we're going to leave them up there for a while. We're going to put the recommendations out there, and also we'll search for support and help groups for the US particularly, but in other areas as well, and we'll put them up on screen so you'll know where to be able to seek and find that help. Brian, your advice, your knowledge, an uncomfortable conversation. We started it. I really do appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I really hope it was helpful. Happy back anytime if there's questions I can answer.
If you do have questions, that's a great idea. Why don't you put them down in the comments field below, or instant message me directly, and we'll consult with Brian and see if we can get back to you on that and see if we can help.
I was not to be tested. I'm next. I've been in the gym every day and I bench. Way too much weight to be getting offended. A whole lot of rage in the way that I step. I've been at war with the monsters inside of my head, and I keep coming out with the win. They gon' get me back on the field again. A whole lot of game and it's about to begin.